Hi, it's Travis Lawrence with Realty One Group Eclipse, your Spokane Realtor. And I've got a special guest today here with me. His name is David Gerard with Advanced Radon Technologies. And he's gonna enlighten us with all kinds of information regarding radon and radon mitigation, the hazards of radon, and radon in real estate. So without further ado, let's get to it. Well, January is National Radon Action Month, and today we're here with David with Advanced Radon Technologies. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Advanced Radon Technologies?
Well, I'm born and raised in Spokane. In fact, I actually live in the house that I grew up in. I bought it from my mother. I went off to school to become a teacher and graduated from honors from Gonzaga, and I was in a different time and unable to get a teaching position. So while I was trying, I started to work for my father, who was a mechanical engineer. A lot of the buildings around here, like City Hall and the section of Deaconess you drive under, have his mechanical engineering designs in them. Well, we had just started doing radon work, and this was in the early 90s, and I was very good at it. So I started doing this more and more and started, continuing to look for teaching jobs less and less. And so that's how I kind of fell into this job. I'm very mechanically minded. If I had better math skills, I would be a mechanical engineer. So when we first started doing this, we did a lot of pretty challenging commercial work. And that's what really got me into doing radon work.
So what is radon? And why is it so important for homeowners to understand its risks?
Okay. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas. It's found in the breakdown from uranium to lead. In that 4.5 billion year half-life of uranium, for 3.825 days, it's a chemically inert noble gas. So it's a heavy metal for almost all of it. So radon is the means of transportation. Radon actually isn't what's bad for us. Radon is how it gets out of the soil and into the atmosphere and into our structures.
How does radon get into a house?
Well, radon is a chemically inert noble gas. It's not impacted by anything but pressure differentials. So it's pushed and pulled. So the best way to think of how radon gets in your house is if you are sitting on an airplane and you look over at the window and you see a crack. Well, if you're on the tarmac, you understand nothing's going to happen to you because the pressure on either side of the window is the same. But if you're at 35,000 feet, you better have your seatbelt on or you're going to be relocated to the cheap seats out there on the wing because the high pressure of the airplane is going to push you through that little window to the outside. The pressures that drive radon are so small that if you're in the Spokane Valley and you turn your clothes dryer on, your clothes dryer takes air from the house, dries the clothes, and discharges it outside, creating a low pressure in the house, which sucks on the walls, the windows, and the floor. And since our soil is so porous, the vast majority of that makeup air comes from the ground and it's laced with radon. So it's that pressure gradient across the slab that does it.
Now, how does the radon levels in this part of the Spokane Coeur d'Alene area differ from other parts of the country?
Well, radon, again, found near the end of the radioactive decay chain of uranium, is found in very old rocks and soils. Clay-based soils are by far the largest portion of areas that have radon problems. So Iowa is the only state in the union that every county is of the highest, meaning more than half the houses are above 4. But if you had a house that was 20 in Iowa, it would probably make the local news. Here, we have very low concentrations of radon in our soil. We have extremely porous material. So you can have a radon atom just above the aquifer, and in the 3.825 days that it's radon, it can migrate all the way into your house by a very small pressure gradient of your clothes dryer running.
Now, how do radon tests vary in the winter versus in the summertime?
Well, the EPA will tell you generally between summer and winter, a tripling, doubling, tripling is pretty typical. There's lots of places in the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene area that it's 5, 10, 20, 30 times different. So the best time in our geology to do a short-term measurement and have it be indicative of a year-long average, because all of the risks assessments are based on an average of 365 days, is generally the mid to later fall through early winter, or late winter through mid to later spring, under traditional fall and spring weather patterns. That's where a 2, 3, 4-day test will be more indicative of a 3-month or a 6-month test. In the summertime, we don't recommend anybody run radon tests if it's above about 80 degrees, because in Spokane, about 65% of all the houses have elevated levels of radon. Kootenai County, it's a little higher, more like 70 or 75%. But in the summertime, only 10 or 15% will fail. But in the wintertime with a foot of snow on the ground, 90 or 95% of them will fail. So the spring and the fall, under traditional weather patterns, is the best time for a short-term measurement to be indicative of your year-long average. And your year-long average is what the risk is based upon, not a spike in the wintertime or a suppression in the summertime. It's that average.
Now, many of my home inspectors use radon testing.
Continuous radon monitors.
Continuous radon monitors, thank you. What is the best way to test the radon levels in my home?
Well, in your own house, using home test kits are actually more sensitive than most of the continuous radon monitors that are available. But they have their own little quirks that you have to understand. The nice thing about a homeowner testing their own house is that they can control when it's run, so they can make sure they match those weather patterns where they're appropriate to run a test. In real estate, we're stuck with time frames. One of the problems is that because we're so restricted, like we had a windstorm yesterday, so that would actually make every test that was conducted in Spokane and Kootenai counties an invalid test because of the windstorm yesterday. Wind is absolutely called out by the EPA. They tell you to watch severe weather one way or the other, and that's one thing people understand. If it's 100 degrees out, that's severe weather the one way, and if it's -5 and snowing like crazy, that's a severe weather in the other way. So generally, if you have a temperature that's 5 to 10 degrees above or below normal, or if we are getting more rain or snow, or it's windy out, those are not appropriate short-term measurements for that test to be very indicative to what's really going on in that house.
Now, radon, I can't see it. It's odorless. It's colorless. What are the hazards of this gas entering my body?
So the radon gas itself isn't it is an alpha emitter, so it is a potential problem. But since it's a chemically inert noble gas, we breathe it in, it bounces around in our lungs, and it breathes back out. The likelihood it would decompose and give off an alpha particle in the 3.825 days it's radon in the brief period of time it's in your lungs is pretty small. But radon decomposes into a heavy metal called polonium-218. And that is a heavy metal, it's chemically active, and it's negatively charged. That sticks in our lungs and it never comes out. And it will continue to decompose until it becomes lead-206, which is the lead in your car battery. Now, it's an individual atom, so it's not like we're all going to get lead poisoning by breathing in radon, because atoms are so small, there's so little matter, that's not how that happens. But as those atoms decompose inside our lungs, they can tear up the lung tissue and damage cells, and that's how radon produces lung cancer. They are studying radon for other things, mainly neurological diseases, because they understand how the byproducts could be carried away by the bloodstream and the damage they could do in our brain tissue. And there are studies that are looking into this, but there's no conclusive evidence that it does do this. There is that alpha particle radiation from radon and its byproducts will produce lung cancer. It's one of the few cancers they know exactly how it happens and they can reproduce it in the lab. But it doesn't have a signature. So there's no way to take your lung cancer and say it came from radon, but they can take radon and cause all 37 distinct types of lung cancer.
How do I mitigate this radon?
Okay. Radon is driven by pressure differential. So there's a variety of ways. People will ventilate. That's why if you open your windows, it does two things. It changes the pressure gradient across your airplane window. So you can't suck the radon through the dirt because the air takes the path of least resistance, which is through an open window or an open crawl space vent or an open door. But that doesn't work very well when it's -5 outside. So the way radon systems work is that they reverse that pressure gradient. So now we made the inside of the airplane the low pressure and the outside of the airplane the high pressure. So now when the window fails, you get blown across the airplane, but you're not blown out of the airplane. In a radon system, we create a low pressure underneath the cement slab that is greater than what the house and the atmosphere apply to the slab. So we flipped it. So now below the slab or below the vapor barrier is the low pressure. The high pressure is above it. So the house is trying to push the radon into the ground, which it gets caught in the radon system, sucked up through the pipe, discharged to the outside above the roof line. But it's all about pressure. It's not about air movement, just like your car tires. They don't care how many cubic feet of air it takes to make 35 psi. All they care about is 35 psi. So if we were in Iowa, your car tire would have a very slow leak. You'd have to put air in it once a month. You're in the Tri-Cities in a sandy loam, you have to put air in it every day. If you're in Otis Orchards, we drilled a 1/2-inch hole in your tire tread, we put an air compressor in the trunk, and it's pumping air in as fast as it's leaking out, the tire would still work. And that's the way our geology is. The air volume that we have to move is purely a byproduct of extending the negative pressure field.
What is an acceptable level of radon in my home, and what are some of the levels that you've seen in this area?
Okay. So non-real estate is different than real estate. 4 is like a speed limit. Okay, so being a little over 4 or a little under 4, there's just not a tremendous amount of health difference between those. Real estate, you're above 4, real estate transaction, you mitigate it, you get it below 4. But in a homeowner, and I've talked lots of people out of radon systems because of when it was tested, what the levels were, and how they used their house. Because the best way to think of low level of radon is because it's just like a car accident. It doesn't build up in your body, you have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So if 4 is driving through the school zone at 20 miles an hour, 3 is driving through at 15, 2 is driving through at 10, okay? Well, we all understand that there's not a huge difference in the likelihood I'm going to die in a traffic fatality between 10 and 20 miles an hour. And that's how radon works. So say you had a 5 picocurie in your basement, but the only thing you did downstairs was your laundry for a couple of hours a week, and your upstairs was 2.5, I would talk you out of putting a radon system in, because the way you use that house, your risk is very minimal compared to somebody who had a brand new baby who's sleeping downstairs, okay? Because then that 5 is going to have a much higher risk to them the way they utilize the house than somebody who never goes downstairs. But again, in real estate transactions, that 4 is just a magical line that, they had to draw a line in the sand somewhere.
So David, you've been doing this for a long time. It seems like you're very knowledgeable. What separates Advanced Radon Technologies from the next radon mitigator?
Well, first of all, this was my father's company. We've been in business since 1971. And we were a mechanical engineering consulting firm. So we come at this from a professional service and a engineering background. In fact, I was trained on my air handling understanding of radon systems from a PE that designed air handling equipment. And I learned about the geology and the radon measurement from 2 professional geologists. This company was founded by Thomas J. Gerard and Associates and Faytech Incorporated. They combined forces to do radon mitigation. And I started in 1993. And so we take a little different of approach. The first thing we did when we got into radon was we designed, built, and we were granted a patent on a diagnostic testing piece of equipment that allows us to very accurately simulate, therefore engineer every structure we do.
You had mentioned that some codes have changed during the recent times regarding new construction. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. Because Spokane County is so high in radon, the state of Washington was the first state to adopt radon-resistant construction all the way back in 1991. And what's changed now is that the new code requires them to put a system in, but now they have to run a radon test to prove that that system is actually doing what it's designed. So that's going to be the nudge that's going to push the snowball down the hill. And I think over the next several years, like Portland, Oregon, where they went from hardly anybody testing it to it virtually becoming part of the real estate transaction, that's what's going to happen here, where the more testing they do in new construction is going to start spilling into existing real estate transactions. That's going to spill into even multifamily, where HUD now is fully invested in radon. So the difference on this change compared to before, because we've had little bumps where they increase the amount of radon awareness, radon testing, and then they slop back down to where they were before. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think 5 or 8 years from now, we're going to be testing 50, 60, 70% of the houses that are bought and sold. And because of our unique situation and our radon levels and our geology, that there's a little bit more liability that realtors have in presenting the appropriate information to their buyers about the risks and about the fluctuations in the testing, and is that indicative? Because it's a lot easier to manipulate our radon levels in our geology than it is anywhere else. And it's about getting the people the right information so they can make an informed decision that puts the onus on them to make those decisions, as opposed to, you can run a radon test if you want or not, is just not a very good approach for realtors moving forward.
So real estate agents and home inspectors need to get educated on this.
Right. And one of the real challenges is that you go take the standard radon stuff and it just isn't very applicable to what we do. But the more you understand about how it works and why it works, and if you pay attention, if you're doing testing and you pay attention to those results and what the weather patterns did and how that interacted, or that you put it in a room that the door was closed and then it was open when you show up and you look at the results and it was way up here and then it was way down here, you can understand how radon works during weather patterns and how people are using the house and all of these sort of things. And the more information you have, the better prepared to interpret and understand why the test did what it did during those weather patterns during that use.
This is extremely valuable information, David. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to enlighten us on this subject. And I hope that we can bring awareness to radon in this area and the radon levels during this National Radon Awareness Action Month.
Action Month. It used to be Awareness Month, but nobody was aware of it, so they tried Action, and nobody's still aware of it. So we're trying.
Well, if you would like to learn more about radon and mitigation, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or David for more information. Check out David's new website, Advanced Radon Technologies.
.net.
And yeah, any final words for the public there?
Well, January is National Radon Action Month, so it's a good time to test. It'll give you kind of a worst case scenario, but it's a good place to start. And if you're buying a house, make sure that you have it tested for radon. If you're selling a house, be prepared that that could be a possibility. Most radon systems cost between $200 and $2,500. So it's like replacing a refrigerator or a water heater, or it's not nearly as bad as having your furnace or your sewer line out to the street replaced. But it is going to become far more common, and the better prepared for it you can be, the easier it will be later on down the road.
Well, thanks again for spending some time with us, and I look forward to getting you connected with my next home buyer.
All right. Thank you.